entity. My name is Jim Murphy. I'm the Managing Program Director at the Episcopal Church Foundation, and I'm very happy that you can join us tonight. As you can see on the screen, we're joined by several other people, and a fifth person will be joining us later in our webinar tonight. So I'll introduce the Episcopal Church Foundation in just a moment, but let me just briefly recognize the three gentlemen from the Presbyterian Foundation who are on the line. The Episcopal Church Foundation has created its own donor-advised fund, which we are very proud to say is an ecumenical effort. We are working directly with the Presbyterian Foundation, who has worked with donor-advised funds for over 20 years, having over several $1 million under management. And we're very pleased that we're able to do this, and I'd like to briefly introduce the folks that are also on the line with us. And I apologize for any background noise that folks are hearing. We had a few issues as we were getting online tonight. So I'd like to introduce Joe Tackett, who will be the primary person leading our webinar for tonight. Joe is the Planning and Development Officer and a donor-advised fund expert. We're also joined by Carl Madison, who is the Vice President of Planned Giving Resources, and also by Greg Russos, who is the President of the New Covenant Trust and the Chief Operating Officer of the Presbyterian Foundation. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Let me just get to the text of our intro. Thank you, Joe. And very briefly, for those of you who may not know, the Episcopal Church Foundation, ECF as we're often known, we are an independent and lay-led organization. We've existed for well over 60 years, 70 years for that matter, and supporting various efforts throughout the Episcopal Church, but primarily focusing on empowering congregations to do what God has called them to do in a variety of different ways through visioning, planning, leadership development, and raising financial resources for ministry to help them transform the church. So we do two main areas of work in our leadership resources and our financial resources. Many of you may already be familiar with many of our resources, such as the Vital Practices website, on which we maintain all of our webinars, such as tonight. We are recording this webinar. We'll be sharing that on the website soon, in addition to a variety of other resources, such as the Vestry Resource Guide and a variety of educational opportunities that we afford for Episcopal leaders throughout the church, both parishes, dioceses, and related organizations. We also have a variety of financial resource programs where we are able to assist in the raising and managing of financial resources to support your mission in the Episcopal Church. We have a wonderful capital campaign area where we can work with your parish or Episcopal organization on a sliding fee scale so that regardless of your size, you are able to afford professional advice at that very important time. We also do a number of things in strategic resources to help you to better understand your mission and where you're moving forward. And we have a variety of areas where we're helping to raise and manage resources, such as planned giving. And many of you have seen our various planned giving webinars because, of course, I have led them. So you may recognize me. And then our endowment management area, where we currently have close to $750 million under management in a variety of forms for Episcopal parishes, dioceses, and other entities all throughout the country. So we are very happy to support and assist Episcopal entities in all of these efforts. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Joe Tackett as I try and understand what might be causing some of that feedback. And Joe, could you please give us a very brief overview about donor-advised funds, what they are, and tell us a little bit. I'll jump in as needed.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. We certainly want to thank Jim, both you and the Episcopal Church Foundation, for having us on tonight. Do want to note one thing real quickly. I don't think we mentioned it earlier. The small pieces that show us as video, if those are in the way of the actual slideshow, you can actually move those around. We found the bottom left was a good spot. It didn't cover up any of the information for the slides that we're going to be going over for the rest of the night. So I did want to mention that quickly. But on to the main topic here. What is a donor advised fund? So this is a review of the prior webinar. Let's start there. It's going to be a philanthropical vehicle that's going to be established at a public charity. Again, public charities are the ones that are going to sponsor this, even if you might have heard of one of a name that's tied to what you think of as an asset management company. Again, public charities. Now, what a donor advised fund does is it allows somebody to create their own individual fund at that public charity within the donor advised fund. They are going to make a charitable contribution to that fund in a manner of different ways. It could be cash, it could be stock, could be property. A lot of different ways to actually make a contribution to the fund. You're going to get an immediate tax deduction when you make that contribution as well. So then you've set up the account, set up the donor advised fund, you've made a contribution to it. The next big piece of that is going to be recommending grants from that fund. Those are going to be out to qualified charities. Again, it's what we think of as general public charities that are out there doing things. Again, this is sort of a hybrid account, exclusively for charitable giving. It's going to have sort of three components that we can think of: checking, sometimes savings, and investment. So checking, because we're going to make, after we make the contributions to it, we're going to ultimately let grants out to charities themselves. Savings, these grants, once you make a contributions to the fund, you don't have to actually grant them out immediately. They can actually stay in that and grow. And investments, we call it an investment account, because you can actually invest the funds. Once they're put in it, they're going to be reinvested. You're going to have control over how those are invested. So again, it's a mix of all kinds of different accounts. It is irrevocable, but again, it is exclusively for charitable giving. So here is another representation, a visual representation of what a donor advised fund is and how it works. So on the left, you'll see you have the donor creating this account. They're going to make a contribution to that donor advised fund. Now, in return, you'll see the arrow back to the donor. The one piece they get back is going to be the charitable deduction. Again, that deduction is going to be tied to when the contribution is made to the account, not later on when grants are made out to the subsequent charities that are going to receive it. It's all upon contribution to the donor advised fund itself. So once you have that done, you're going to have administration of the donor advised fund. It's going to be a mixture with the Episcopal Foundation of Mr. Murphy, and then also ourselves as well on the back end in our conjunction with them. And then you're going to see the arrows that flow out of that. Here we're really talking about the grant making, the money that comes out, the checks that go to the charity and the charitable causes that you, the donor, are interested in. In these examples, we have health charities, your parish, church projects, again, 501c3s, public charities, but again, you have flexibility in who you're granting to. It is not solely limited to one type of entity. So, again, why is this important for you all, the charity leaders within the church? Well, DAFs are becoming a very, very large entities and very important in charitable giving overall. They're actually some of the largest repositories of charitable dollars, and most recently in the Philanthropy 400, a donor advised fund took over the top spot as the largest single source of donations for the most recent year. So very large charitable organization set up specifically dealing with donor advised funds. Some figures that you can see here, there are estimates that up to 10% of all individual giving could come from donor advised fund very soon. Now that's a significant amount, 10%, if you think about all the 10% coming into your church, potentially coming from donor advised funds very soon. again, at the end, you'll see more and more charities are starting to offer this. So again, it must be a public charity that sponsors this. So the Episcopal Church Foundation certainly falls within that category, and we are certainly happy to partner with them. You can see some of the changes to giving and philanthropy by the calls, 14 to 15. You'll see donor-advised funds actually increased by 17% from that just year to year. But an interesting thing to remember is that the donor-advised fund giving to them overall was actually much higher, a trend over the last 15 years. So they may have increased by 17%, but they were already sometimes in the lead as far as the actual amount of dollars flowing in. So that is the main reason it's really important to know about DAFs, to talk about DAFs. It's because a lot of money is flowing into them. And unlike most of these others on this chart on the right-hand side, the funds still have to come out of the donor-advised fund. When it's flowing into education, arts and culture, colleges, health, whatever it may be, that's an end use. A donor-advised fund is not the end use. It still has to come out. So you're seeing increased giving to them, and you need to be a part of that because, again, that money needs to flow out of those donor-advised funds. So having said that, sort of the general overview of DAFs, I think I'm going to let Jim talk about what makes the ECF DAFs special.
Well, thanks, Joe, and I appreciate that. You know, the one thing I realized I wanted to clarify for all of our listeners tonight is that this isn't just for the wealthy. Many people, when they hear about a donor-advised fund and all of these billions and billions of dollars going in on an annual basis, they just assume that is a tool then for the wealthy, and it's not for them. And there are many donor-advised funds which are available for more modest, for those of more modest means. And that is a part of why the Episcopal Church Foundation chose to move ahead and create its own DAF. And I don't want to really dwell on this. I mean, just to note that a part of our threshold, part of our emphasis in promoting our own donor-advised fund is that we have such a low threshold. It's as low as $2,500. So practically anyone can create a donor-advised fund and have all of the advantages, all of the simplicity that goes with it, that you can make grants for as little as $100 each. You have a full online portal access, just like any other large donor-advised fund, such as Fidelity, such as Vanguard, and all of those other really wonderful secular opportunities. But you also, within our fund, you also have access to a number of different investment options. And as long as you're able to make 51% of the grants to Episcopal entities, to Episcopal churches, dioceses, schools, etc., you can still give grants out to any other legitimate charity all throughout the country. ECF put this together because there is such a need and because there are so many people who really need to have access to a tool like this to simplify their giving, to make one gift and then disperse it out, just like Joe is saying, to as many charities as they would like. And this is just a real quick screenshot of what we have to offer you. But ECF now makes this available to you, and we're very happy, as we said before, that our friends at the Presbyterian Foundation can work with us and bring this high-quality donor-advised fund tool to you. It's not going to be for everyone, but the reason we're doing this webinar tonight is the next part of what Joe is going to talk about, which are the practical applications, the practical tools to help you as an Episcopal leader better understand, how these donor-advised funds work and how you can better encourage the members of your congregation, your constituents that may support your Episcopal entity, to take action, whether or not they have a donor-advised fund with the Episcopal Church Foundation or with another entity. Give you the tools and better understanding so that you can encourage them to make more of these types of gifts to you. Because unfortunately, throughout the church, and I know it's true in the Presbyterian Church as well as our own church, we don't always take our actions that actually benefit and help support our mission. And this is one way that you can help support the donor's needs. When they have a donor-advised fund, this is clearly a need that they're trying to fulfill. You are enabling their generosity by basically shaking hands with what they're trying to accomplish and allowing them to know they can make these gifts to your church or your Episcopal institution. I don't want to steal any more of Joe's thunder, so I'm going to turn it right over to Joe to take over and give us some pointers as leaders throughout the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, happy to. So sort of what the structure that we decided on was sort of a don't cheat sheet and a do cheat sheet. So I'm going to start with the don'ts first. And again, from here on out, the approach that we're taking, I want to reiterate, is really for you all as leaders, what you should be doing and things that will help you all in working with the donors that have them.
And so, let me just interject there for a second, Joe. Yeah. Everyone who registered for this webinar, or if you're viewing this on the recording, we have these tools that we will talk about. We have a cheat sheet of do's and don'ts and basics. We have a sample pledge card, which we'll show you. We have all of these tools to share with you electronically so that you can put them to direct and immediate use. Sorry, Joe, go right ahead.
Oh, no, excellent. So getting back to the list here, the number one don't cheat sheet, and I think this is certainly more important for a lot of churches than it might be other charities that would be receiving it. Don't allow or encourage your parishioners, your members to play pledges with their grants from their DAFs. Now, this one's number one because it's extremely important. I know it's very common throughout churches of all denominations to have pledge cards and have that be an important tool, but you cannot do that. And we'll actually go into this one a little bit more in depth after this slide. So I'm going to give you the full list, but then we're going to touch on number one again. Number two, don't allow them to be used for the donor's personal benefit. This common example is a membership. Maybe you have a charitable event where you're selling tickets to it at your church. Can't buy the tickets with that. Again, they can't receive a personal benefit from their grant. That they're going to just simply have to do it as they always have from their own personal funds. Don't accept grants into non-approved legal structures. I put this one in. I'm not sure if it touches a lot of churches in the Episcopal denomination, but within the Presbyterian Church, some churches have their own separate foundation. They're a true separate legal structure to get assets, to hold assets. So if you do have something outside of your just general operating legal structure that you have set up, I would suggest talk to an attorney and make sure that your own structure can receive DAF grants before you have anything put into that. Finally, on the don't cheat sheet, don't provide the donor with a tax acknowledgement letter. We discussed this earlier when we talked about the way donor-advised funds work. They get the contribution to deduction is on the way into the DAF, not on the way out to you. So that is important, and that is a common misconception. So I mentioned about the first DAF restriction, no playing pledges. So the link that you will see there that you can follow, what that is a link to an IRS letter to an individual that wrote in and asked, can I essentially pay for pledges with my donor-advised fund? Now, it was a 2-page letter, very basic. What you see now is an excerpt from the second page. Now, what this individual did, they had pledge cards to 2 different charities. One, I believe, was a general one-time payment. The other was sort of a scheduled payment, so equal payments over, let's say, 3 years. Asked, can I pay one or either one of these IRS with my donor-advised fund? So the IRS wrote back, and this is sort of the key point that I want to point out, is this final paragraph here. Here, the IRS explains that a charitable pledge is an obligation of the donor. Now, that's going to be based on different state laws, and you may not know this, but pledges can actually rise to the level of a legal obligation. Sometimes it doesn't create that much to create that legal obligation. Now, the church, especially churches, they're not going to go after somebody, even though they have the right to. You're not going to say, no, I'll see you in court over that $50 pledge that we haven't received yet. That's just not going to happen. But it doesn't mean that the right doesn't exist. Now, the fact, the key thing is that a charity cannot relieve an individual of a right or a legal obligation like that. So, again, the grant out is not coming from you individually. It's coming from the charity that sponsors your donor advised fund. So if that were to be used to pay for a pledge that you had made individually, that would be a charity relieving you of that obligation. So that is why it's impermissible to use donor advised fund grants to pay for a pledge. It doesn't matter if it's, again, a single payment or a series of payments. We can't use them for pledges. Now, you might ask, well, how do we get around this? Because it's such an important part of, I'm certain most churches, is that pledge card. It gives you a way to have an idea year to year as far as tracking, planning, your finance committees are going to have. What kind of revenue can we expect from pledges or stewardship campaigns, whatever it may be. Now, I'm going to go ahead and
I just wanted to clarify there, Joe didn't mean you're trying to get around the law in that.
No.
It's seeking to encourage giving in a new and impactful way.
Yeah, and once we explain this a little more, I think it'll show why we're not trying to get around the law or anything like that. We're not using this for pledges, but once we understand some of the language, it becomes more apparent. So I wanted to give you a couple different approaches because, again, this is for you as leaders. We're going to offer one at the end that is sort of a combined approach, but that doesn't mean that the people that would be giving to you would all be coming from our group. It could be coming from others, so I want to at least expose you to other pieces. This sticker approach, this is really driven by the Donor Advised Fund sponsor. So what it involves is they produce some sort of sticker that is used to affix it to your own pledge card that you, the charity, created. So if you see your own pledge card that has nothing about Donor Advised Funds on it or anything like that, but you see somebody turn it in, and it has a sticker that has language along these lines on it. It says, I'm happy, however, to recommend a grant from my Donor Advised Fund. That's the general language, maybe a little bit different from provider to provider, but that's the general thing that you will see. What they're signaling to you is that they themselves are not making an individual promise to pay or to donate, pledge any money. What they are saying is that they will simply ask or recommend that a grant be made from their Donor Advised Fund. Now, to break down that language again, when we're requesting a grant from a Donor Advised Fund, what we are doing is asking for that sponsor to do that. They still have the right to say yes or to say no to any grant recommendation. So you, the individual, when you say this, you're signaling to your charity that I don't even have the right to give it to you. I have to ask for someone else to give this grant out, and they can approve or deny. So another approach you might see is a separate document. So in this case, and it can be both driven by the Donor Advised Fund sponsor or by you, the individual charity or parish. In the separate document, what we have is you have your traditional pledge card. The language on that doesn't change at all. But in addition to that, you have a separate card that's going to be used for Donor Advised Fund gifts. There, you're not going to use, as you can see on this one, there's no language that says pledge or gift or I promise to. You're going to have that similar language to the one on the sticker where it says, I intend to recommend the following grant. Again, I intend to recommend a grant from my Donor Advised Fund, not I am personally pledging to pay that. And again, this could come from the Donor Advised Fund sponsor. In that case, you would say the individual donor would be filling in the name of your charity under the to line. Now, you could also create one yourself, and then that would already be included in that you would have done. But again, another option that you can see out there working with giving charities a way to see gifts that are coming in, but not have it rise to the level of a pledge. So the final one I want to touch on is this. The examples of the revised pledge card is the additional language approach. So here you have your traditional pledge card, but in addition to that, you're adding more language that specifically covers pledges. So this is actually a screenshot of the pledge card that I believe will be available to you.
That's
correct. What I want to do is highlight the blue level here. So again, we're following the same language style. I intend to request the donor advised fund to make the following grant. Again, signaling that you individually do not have the power to do that all on your own, outside of simply asking the sponsoring organization to make the grant from your fund. Now, moving from don't to do. The do cheat sheet. This is a little bit more fun here. We get to definitely want you all to acknowledge that donor advised funds exist, and that just simply that they're becoming very common and an important part. As we mentioned, upwards to 10% could come from that. Number one on the Philanthropy 400, it is very important. I just don't think we've talked about them a lot within a church setting to the degree that other charities maybe have, and that's important to start doing that. So one way we're going to acknowledge that they exist is that we're going to mention that we accept those DAF gifts in all of your contact points. Now that might be anything from a flyer to a bulletin insert to mention an announcement during the actual church service itself at the end. Could be any of those, but again, you want to let people know that you do accept DAF gifts. Do provide a thank you letter to your DAF grantors. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a few slides. Do get to know your DAF grantors. This is important. You're going to know certain people you might see make multiple DAF gifts. Get to know them. Get to know the type of ministries that they're interested in supporting. And perhaps that gives you an opportunity to not only involve them from a monetary standpoint, but from an actual personal participation standpoint. Or get to learn new things that you could reach out to as far as different new ministries that you'd be involved with. But now, certainly you want to know what your DAF grantors are interested in, but I think you absolutely need to let your members of the parish as a whole know what your needs are. Again, those are very important, and let those needs be known, because again, you yourself know your church the best and know what areas that you want to support. So when we talk about the next little group of slides here, the last couple that I'm going to talk about, the DAF process, we're cutting out the part where we're talking about the donor setting it up. It's already been set up. This is the process for you, the individual church receiving the grant, what you can expect. Step one, the individual is going to submit the grant to the sponsoring organization. This that you can see is a copy of the actual Episcopal Foundation's grant recommendation form.
Although ours is usually done electronically, but we like this image more than what the screenshot looked like. So yes, it can be done either way.
Yeah, and so on that, you're going when they do that, you're going to recommend who the grant is to, the amount, perhaps timing of the grant, but also perhaps a restriction. So again, they're going to be submitting that to their own sponsoring organization, and it's up to the sponsoring organization to approve or deny the grant. Now, the vast majority of grants are going to be approved. That's just simply the practice that we've seen in the real world. But just to let you know, that's sort of the first part. You may be involved in that. They may say that they're doing this. It might be something where you don't really know that a grant was submitted until we get to step two. Here, the grant recipient, your parish, is going to receive the funds. You are going to certainly get, if you're doing it from the Episcopal Foundation, in addition to the check, the actual grant itself, a cover letter explaining that. It's going to have some key important pieces in it. Should talk about perhaps the donor will choose, it could say the donor's name and identity. Donors typically have the ability to be anonymous or include their name. Any restrictions that may have been put on that. And it's also going to have a couple other key reminders. again, that it is no tax acknowledgement is needed. We have, at the foundation, we've actually received tax acknowledgments from grant recipients. That is not necessary. Again, some other key pieces of information will be involved in this letter explaining the grant to you that you received. Now, the next step. This is really where the parish itself starts to get more involved with an active thing to do. Very, very important thing to do. Thank the donor. I think it's absolutely critical to continue to receive gifts, to thank people for those gifts. Now, I think this could be even in two parts. An initial thank you letter stating that you received the gift itself. Very important. And that can be done quickly. And again, this letter even includes, again, it's not for tax purposes. I'm going to be very clear about that. Your letter to your donors, to the people that have made grant to you, are not for tax purposes. They're simply for thanking them for their gift. The donors themselves shouldn't be using your thank you letter as a tax acknowledgement. All of that happens at the donor advised fund level before the grant's made. Now, as a second part of the thank you letter, if you will, almost like a second thank you letter, follow up with the donor. Explain, perhaps after a little bit of time, how that donor advised fund grant impacted your ministries and how it impacted what you were doing in your church, in your community, wherever the funds might be being used. Follow up with them so that they see that. That's important to know that the funds were used and the funds made a difference. So those are some of the steps that I have as far as just trying to keep it very simple and focused on what the parish should do when they receive a donor advised fund grant. Now,
thank you very much, Joe. I think that's a really great review. And the highlights, I just want to reiterate to folks who are out there. Again, we're talking about all donor advised funds. We're using the examples of ECF because we have access to those and we can do that easily. Mm-hmm. But of course, you may well have many people in your congregation that work with other institutions, and that's where you'll be getting the donor advised fund information from. But we wanted to share the process for how this will happen to you. How will you work through what you need to do in your response? So, and I just see Nicolette Norris saying that yes, that is St. James. I'm very happy. I knew we were going to have a couple of people from Lancaster on the line, and I love St. James so much that I wanted to make sure we got the picture of your beautiful church up. And the National Cathedral's there too, and the wonderful American Red Cross. But regardless, we wanted to go through these steps just for you to be thinking through what you need to do, what are the actions you need to take, and here's the key thing, what you are looking for in the information you receive. And when you get these attachments, which will be tools you can use, it will help to guide you so that you know, okay, that name that's showing up is the advisor to the donor advised fund. That's the primary person you're probably going to want to thank and build the relationship with. But do know, as Joe mentioned, it may be anonymous, and that is okay. Some people wish to remain anonymous. That's one of the advantages. If they choose to use a donor advised fund, they may wish to be anonymous. In all likelihood, honestly, and I think this is true at the Presbyterian Church, you're not going to be anonymous to your parish. That will be so rare, it may not even be worth mentioning, but it is possible. But you are understanding the components of what you're getting through a DAF grant and through these tools, hopefully being empowered to know how do you take that next step to thank and show impact. And I can't underscore enough what Joe said about communicating impact. This is something all of us at the Episcopal Church Foundation are talking about all the time. Even in our own work, we're seeking to show the impact which we have, the difference which we are making in our church and in our world. This is something you must communicate to your donors beyond even the donor advised fund, but especially when you have someone who has created a donor advised fund, they do want to know the impact, the difference that this grant has made. So hopefully this will further inspire you as leaders of your local congregation or Episcopal institution to ensure that you are always communicating back to your donors and constituents so that they will be in a tighter and closer relationship with you, because that is how you are able to maintain that close relationship and the ongoing consistent relationship. If you've heard my planned giving webinars, you know where I'm headed with this. That consistent relationship that will ensure that people may choose to give you a planned gift, which is, of course, one of the largest and most important gifts that any Episcopal church or institution can receive. Joe, as always, I'm jumping in. Thank you. But what I wanted to go to next is we talk about impact and donor needs and all of these things that are so important. I am just utterly thrilled to be able to introduce Clyde Coons, who is not only a board member, but I can say with absolute certainty an extremely fine individual. He is our very first DAF participant at the Episcopal Church Foundation. He is a board member of the Episcopal Church Foundation. Regrettably, he's shifting off the board, and I will cry at our next board meeting, but nonetheless, Clyde has a very unique situation where he can tell us a few stories of impact to help inspire you who tuned into this webinar to learn more about how does this impact the donor and the people that are making these grants, and why Clyde is such a key person in this will become apparent in just a second. Let me read Clyde's bio. Clyde, in more than 25 years in the nonprofit sector, he has served in various leadership roles as consultant to nonprofit organizations for more than 17 years. He serves on several boards, including ECF, the Leadership Council of Arizona State University, Lodestar Center on Philanthropy, Nonprofit Loan Fund of Southern Arizona, and, I love this, the Grammy-nominated True Concord Voices and Orchestra. So thank you for all that you do. And I'm honored that you could be with us, Clyde, and I'm hoping you've taken yourself off of mute so that you can share some of your experience and wisdom and guidance for the leaders in the Episcopal Church who've tuned in today.
Well, thank you, Jim. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine through the webinar itself.
Great. I thank you for giving me this time. I am so thrilled that ECF is now offering the Donor-Advised Fund product. Speaking as a Donor-Advised Fund holder, let me just tell you about some of the advantages that I think are available to people who establish these funds. My situation last year when these became available through ECF, my situation last year was that I knew that my income was going to be significantly higher last year than I anticipated it will be in 2017. So opening a donor-advised fund at ECF enabled me to make a very large, what for me was a very large contribution into my donor-advised fund, which I am now using to make charitable gifts that I would have made in 2017. But the beauty of it is I got the tax deduction fully last year when I put the funds into the DAF. For me, that was a significant benefit. There may be people in your constituencies, whether that's members of your parish or supporters of your school, whatever your constituencies are, who have a similar kind of situation where they might have a fluctuating income. Maybe they sold a business, or they're planning to sell a business. They're going to have a need for a higher than ordinary tax deduction. Opening a DAF is a really terrific way for them to get that tax deduction in the year in which they need it, and then be able to moderate their philanthropy over the next several years by making grant recommendations from their fund. I think that's one of the greatest advantages. Because I work in the field of philanthropy, I also know of quite a few individuals who make their gifts by transferring appreciated securities to nonprofit organizations. When they support multiple charities, they might support their church and 3 or 4 or 20 other organizations, that requires them making multiple transfers of securities to multiple organizations. The donor-advised fund allows someone who makes their gift through appreciated securities to make their entire charitable gift into their donor-advised fund, and then to recommend grants from that fund to the various charities. They're still supporting the charities in exactly the way they would have, but it has simplified their life momentously by having to make one stock or other securities transfer rather than multiple transfers. So those are two really good reasons why individuals would establish a fund. In part of my career, I worked for a community foundation which offered donor-advised funds, and they had a $10,000 minimum for establishing a fund. And if you wanted to invest that fund in securities, you had to have a fund that had at least $25,000 in it. One of the beauties of establishing the fund with ECF is that the fund minimum is only $2,500, and you have available to you a wide variety of investment options. I happened to open my fund last year, I believe in August.
Yes.
And within the first few months of my opening that fund, the fund appreciated by 7%. Now, I'd started my fund with $10,000, which meant I had an extra $700 to give away to charity. So it's just a remarkable, remarkable product. I could not be more pleased. The earnings that accrue in a donor-advised fund accrue tax-free to you or to the individual who opened the fund. And they just, as long as the market's going up, they continue to accrue assets that can be used for charitable purposes. I have personally used mine. I made my gift to my own parish through my donor-advised fund in January, the first week of the year. That necessitated a conversation with my rector. He happens to have come from the field of fundraising, so he understood a bit about donor-advised funds. But we had to have a conversation about that because I was actually asked to give the stewardship sermon, and immediately afterward I told him I would not be making a pledge. And he asked why, and I said, because I'm going to make my gift as a recommendation from my donor-advised fund. His response was, I don't know how we're going to book that because we only have 2 lines on our balance sheet or on our income statement, one for pledge offerings and one for plate offerings. And I said, well, create a new category called donor-advised gifts or donor-advised grants, which is what he did. And my gift now resides happily in that contribution line of the financials. But there's a way around that kind of issue. Jim mentioned it earlier that no one would want to make a gift likely to their parish anonymously, but one of the beauties of donor-advised funds is that gifts can be made anonymously. So a gift, again, only 51% of the gifts need to go to Episcopal parishes or Episcopal entities. The other 49% can be used for other charitable giving. And I have used my donor-advised fund to make multiple gifts to numerous nonprofit organizations that I support. In some of those cases, if I did not want to appear on their public donor listing for whatever reason, because I didn't want other nonprofits hitting me up, having seen my name on their list, I can make that gift anonymously, and they will know nothing except that it came from a donor-advised fund at the Episcopal Church Foundation. It's a wonderful gift to be able to offer individuals that flexibility to be able to make their gifts anonymously should they choose to do so. And just one last comment I'd like to make, and that is that the online interface that is available for these funds is amazing. I can make gifts at any time of the day or night, 24/7, 365. It is simple to use. It is understandable. All the information that I want is available to me there. I am thrilled with the front end accessibility and the ease of use for making gifts through my donor-advised, or making grant recommendations rather, through my donor-advised fund.
Thank you, Clyde, very much. And I just wanted also to just highlight sort of a lot of the different pieces of what you're saying, that, you know, whether or not you choose to open a donor-advised fund with ECF or with any other entity like Fidelity or another, I mean, there's a lot of great options, but all of them are donor-centric, and that's the message that we want to get across to Episcopal leaders tonight. These are donor-centric tools. The Donor-Advised Fund is a donor-centric tool, meaning it is fulfilling many of the donors' needs, and you as Episcopal leaders are participating in that. And by using some of the tools and gaining the knowledge that we're seeking to share with you tonight, you will be in a better position for collaborating with your constituents so that they can make appropriate gifts to you. And the anonymity issue is an important one because with a variety of different funds, you may want to be anonymous. That's a really important thing and not one that should be minimized in any way. So thank you, Clyde. Did you have any other comments, or shall I mute?
I do have one more thing, if you don't mind. That is, donor-advised funds are now the recipient of more charitable dollars nationally than any other entity. The amount of money flowing into donor-advised funds is huge. So whether you know it or not, the individuals who are donors to your parish or your church organization, many of them already have donor-advised funds. They may not know that they can make a gift to you through that fund. You need to be talking with them, and they likely do not know that those funds are available through the church foundation. So the more you can spread that word, the better.
Thank you very much, Clyde. I want to continue on. Though I've muted my friend Joe Tackett, I want to make sure that everybody can see the other members of our panel for tonight, and I have unmuted them at long last. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over really the closing part of our conversation tonight, and I'm going to say a few things. But before I turn it over, I just want to encourage everyone, if you have questions, please type into the chat message. You can move your cursor down at the bottom of the screen and pose your, oh, it looks like somebody actually used the Q&A. Guys, if it's okay with you, I'm going to read the question. I'm just going to read it out loud from Nicolette Norris. I understand that larger tax benefits in a given year of having open one's fund and the example giving of timing in a year when it anticipates a tax hit. So I think what the person is bringing up is laying out advantage of giving to the DAF, re-grant tax. So I think what Nicolette is asking is primarily just understanding that you get that initial tax deduction right away, and then you choose later on how it gets granted out. So from a sequencing point of view, you get the donor gets the immediate tax deduction right now and then makes grants. When they make those other grants, they do not get any other tax benefit because they receive the full tax benefit up front. If anyone else has any questions, please do just type that into the chat message. We're going to have another pause in a moment for any questions to the panelists. But without further ado, Clyde, did you have something to say?
Yeah, Jim, just I want to respond to Nicolette's question in a different way a little bit, because I think it's important. She asked about the other benefits besides the tax advantages.
Sorry, I was having trouble reading it, so.
And I think there are several. First of all, I had the experience of learning about a nonprofit that was being started by the granddaughter of a close friend, and I decided to use the Donor Advised Fund to make a grant recommendation to that nonprofit. The good folks, some of whom you're talking to on the line here, that do the administration of the Donor Advised Fund, got back to me and they said they had researched that organization and found that it was not a qualifying charity.
That's correct.
So that was a helpful piece of information to me, that I didn't have to do the legwork on learning about that organization and whether it qualified for a tax-deductible contribution. So I was grateful to have had opened the DAF and to have chosen to make a grant recommendation to that organization through the DAF, because they did that research for me.
Thank you, Clyde. That's a very important point. I'm sorry, I was having trouble reading the question while doing a couple things here. So if others have questions, please do type in your questions into the chat box and we will answer them. But without further ado, for about 8 minutes, I want to turn over to Greg Russo's and Carl Madison, some of their perspectives, given the 20-year long experience of working with donor-advised funds at the Presbyterian Foundation. Some of your thoughts about cultivating gifts from DAFs. And Carl, why don't we start with your comments?
Yeah, thank you. Let me actually start off with giving myself a little bit. My family, we use a DAF for our gifts. And to answer the previous question, actually, our motivation was to simplify giving and to minimize all of the paperwork that comes with gift acknowledgments and things like that, because we had a big problem with that, actually, my mother. And so we started that, and now actually my family, we actually use my mother's donor-advised fund for all of our transactions. It's been a real gift to us, a lot of benefits that we never anticipated. So quickly here, what I'm going to do is kind of wrap this topic up, and let's put a bow on it, on cultivating gifts from DAFs. I'm going to use the term DAFs for efficiency, donor-advised funds, as you saw earlier. But like we've been saying, DAFs are growing fast. They're no longer a rarity. We know that many who are sitting in your pews already have DAFs, and we know that many should have DAFs. So if you're not seeing those DAF distributions coming in, we'll share 4 benefits that your parish might be missing. And of course, there's perhaps more, but here's some that I think are maybe resounding with you all. DAFs facilitate intentional giving. Intentional giving, which usually translates into improved giving to the parish. DAFs help a donor plan their charitable distributions more rationally so that a relative portion goes to their relative passion. And that usually works out the advantage of the parish. And let's phrase it differently. Impulsive and responsive giving to, let's say, fundraising efforts and to friendships might take a smaller bite out of their charitable giving if it's more rational. 2, higher gift completion rates. There's an increased likelihood that a gift will be completed since the funds have already been set aside, they've already been given, and they're available. And 3, there's an increased opportunity for extra giving, like capital giving, for example. Like DAFs might improve the size and number of responses to occasional capital needs appeals or to mission appeals. And number 4 is operational simplicity. This is beautiful. This is why, as I mentioned, our family has one. DAFs might increase your staff's and your donors. Actually, let me say DAFs might decrease your staff and your donors' workload. It's simpler than receiving gifts of securities and mutual funds. And that can be a very highly stressful thing to receive, especially at year end. So thinking about those 4 benefits, if you're not seeing those DAF distributions, then we can actually appeal to those 2 different audiences. Remember, the audience that do have DAFs and those who should have DAFs. We can appeal to them with roughly the same messaging. So I'm going to go through 4 ideas that might increase your, let's say, DAF flow. In these conversations and communications channels that you probably already have in place. So let's go. Idea 1 is regular congregation communications. Tell your parish that we know that cash and checks are less and less common and that new forms of giving are here, and make it clear that we are prepared for those new ways of giving. Point out that all of these new pathways of giving, like online giving opportunities and certainly distributions from giving funds, and describe them lightly, making sure that they know that these are tax efficient gifts, a lot less effort, but we are sitting here awaiting those. And that's not an ask particularly, that's just a message that we are being responsive to what we know that they need. And maybe another kind of message might be around year end, dropping the hint. Get that message out there that gifts of securities and distributions from giving funds may take time to process. If you're contributing before year end, submit your distribution request by at least 10 days in advance. So you're integrating DAFs into regular messaging where you might normally give out messages about gifts of securities. You're not swapping that out, you're expanding it, and people will start asking about it or wondering about it. But they've really probably already heard about it, especially the ones who might need it. We'll talk about number 2. Idea number 2 is staff training. Why staff training? This is probably the most logical space for the conversation. Staff members are the hub for giving transactions. They receive and they process gifts, and then they communicate with the members or donors with acknowledgement or even verbal conversations. So as the recurring touch point with donors, equip them for both likelihoods. One is that you've got people who are making DAFs, and you've gotten some great pointers in this webinar of how to respond to that, but also with those who should consider DAFs, because we've got a lot of them out there. So staff training doesn't mean a 2-day seminar. It means maybe 15 minutes. Buy them coffee and donuts. That's actually what we sometimes do to get them to sit down and remind them how important their role is in stewardship, that they're in the most likely place to give relevant feedback to your members. Those members who might be struggling through making gifts of securities, it's a good idea, but it might be hard. Or they might improve or simplify, their giving processes. There's so many people who would qualify that. So you can share with the staff, let's say, that we should be seeing more of these gifts if we're not already. This is something that members who give appreciated securities should probably be aware of, and that DAFs might alleviate that year-end fire drill that they experience, plus their donors experience as well. And then during this training, share some of the pointers from this webinar. These are like some really clear and simple instructions to follow on how to respond to that. 2 more ideas. The third one is a mini education seminar for interested members. Another brief overview, maybe 30 minutes. Again, bring some donuts and coffee for members who are regular givers of appreciated assets. Tell them, hey, we're going to provide a pre-worship coffee time to come, and we want to outline some of the benefits, reasons you might consider a DAF. Give them a thumbnail sketch of how they work. And notice, this is not a sale. It's filling them in on a way of giving that they've undoubtedly heard about. We're providing perhaps a response to a need that some of them know they need. Others might not be aware yet. And last one is a reference to an earlier comment. Idea number 4 is increasing your capital giving opportunities. Capital giving opportunities, I want to rephrase that as these are your vestry's unfunded priorities, things that just didn't get into the budget but you might need. They can be big, they can be small. But we see it time and time again where your members frequently respond to specific requests and urgent needs. So since their tax-efficient giving funds are already standing by, kind of waiting, like Joe mentioned earlier, they have to get distributed. So those members with DAFs are more likely to respond because something is sitting there ready to go more quickly and probably in a much bigger way. And let's call this also a wish list. These are your unfunded vestry priorities, the wish list. Publicize it. It can be online, it can be in paper, and over in the side column, let them know that there's some non-cash ways to give. So thanks for this time. Here, these have been a few ideas on how to cultivate DAF distributions, again, by using those conversations and communications channels that you already have in place.
Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you. And I know your recap will be in one of the tools that we give out. So thank you very much. And I want to turn the floor over to Greg to wrap it up in just 2 minutes, and then I need to wrap it up in 30 seconds. So Greg, just to also note to everybody out there, we'll be having another DAF webinar in the fall, and that DAF webinar is going to truly focus on the donor. It will be the DAF donor webinar for those who might be interested. So just know that what Carl had suggested about maybe gathering some folks together to learn about a webinar, we're going to be recording about a 30-minute webinar in the fall that you can take advantage of. So stay tuned. We'll be back in touch with that additional tool in addition to everything we're going to share with you tonight. So take it away, Greg.
Sure, and I'll be brief, Jim. Thank you. And I also want to just say thank you to the Episcopal Church Foundation and allowing us to serve ECF. It's wonderful. It's a blessing to support ECF in this work. So my comments are brief. The first is really reiterating what has been said before. Don't underestimate the number of people in your parishes that have donor advised fund. It is by far the largest giving vehicle. Make sure you know how to appeal to those people using the tools that we talked about tonight. What's critical is make your needs known. As Clyde indicated, he made a large gift into his donor advised fund last year. Wasn't sure where his grants were going to go, but got the tax deduction this year. That money is sitting there. He can grant it out, but so make your needs known to folks that your parish can accept grants from donor-advised funds, and these are the needs. And then finally, also make sure they know the impact of the grant. That is key for getting recurring grants from donor-advised funds, is more and more donors today want to know the impact, the return, the social return, the ministry return on the gift that you make. And then the last comment I'll make, just real briefly, is a donor-advised fund with the Episcopal Church Foundation is very, very important and helpful to you. Folks have a choice where they can create their donor-advised fund. They can go to a Fidelity, they can go to a Schwab, they can go to a community foundation. But you should know the one that is going to advocate for you is the Episcopal Church Foundation. Fidelity, Schwab, whoever it is, they're going to advocate for you. They're not going to encourage.
We ran into a bit of a glitch there on Greg's reception, so if folks can still hear me, Joe, let's take it to the last couple of slides.
The Episcopal Church Foundation will. They have hope there.
Sorry, Greg, there's a lot of feedback as well. So thank you very much, Greg. I'm sorry, I just want to wrap that up, and thank you again for all of what you do. So just to wrap up, whether or not a DAF is right for you, whether or not an ECF DAF is right for you, contact ECF, let us know. If it is something, we'd be happy to support you with. So there are a number of webinars which are always available to you that you can see at any time on our Vital Practices website, ecfvp.org. So please do take advantage and take a peek at those. All of us at the Episcopal Church Foundation and in our financial resource area are always available to assist and to guide you in what you're seeking to achieve. And just in closing, Joe, if you could just go to that last slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so just in closing, if there's anything that the Episcopal Church Foundation can do to you to help in your leadership resources or financial resource needs, please do let us know. That is why we exist. We've covered a lot of technical detail today, but just to reiterate what is most important here, and what is most important is that you are empowering your donors through knowledge and helping them to see that there are additional ways that they can support your mission and ministry. And this is one of the most impactful ways nowadays. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I wish you all safe travels if you've traveled anywhere and you'll be traveling home. I thank all of the participants in this evening's webinar. It was a fantastic webinar. And everyone who participated or is listening to this not only gets a recording and all the slides, but they will also receive all of the different tools. And that is our goal, to empower you with tools and resources to help you do the work that God's called you to do in your own particular and unique situation. So thank you all for attending tonight. God bless. And as we can still say it, happy Easter to all. Happy Easter. Thank you. And thank you, guys. So this concludes our webinar for the night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
And Joe, if you could just stop sharing your screen, I will stop recording. So thank you all for coming tonight. Have a wonderful evening.